Anyway, he'll be conducting the auditorium class today and also the AM service. We'll take any more time, brother.
That's not me doing that.
That's up to them.
It helps to turn it on. No, to his credit, he told me to turn it on earlier. And we use these at our congregation. But anyway, it's good to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. I wanted to bring us some lessons. I feel and hope and pray that you will feel them useful and that you will gain some insight possibly to God's word and God's will. Possibly a different view of some of the things. Am I still off? No, I'm good. I'm good. He come back around that corner again and said, uh-oh, I done it again. But anyway, I do appreciate that opportunity. I do attend the Fairview congregation in Pulaski. I serve there as one of their elders, and I work in healthcare. I'm a full-time healthcare employee. I work at the hospital in Giles County or Pulaski. Been there for 20 years, and that's my occupation. They call me a healthcare engineer. I said, okay, you can call me whatever you want to as long as you pay me. Okay, that's what I'm interested in. Okay, well, this morning in the Bible class hour, I want to bring us a lesson from the Old Testament. I know y'all might be studying elsewhere in the Bible. I think y'all were studying 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians on Sunday mornings. Okay. Well, and then we are too at our congregation. We're in 1 Corinthians. Our preacher, Brandon Greaves, has done a very excellent job of leading us in that. And but what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave 1 Corinthians and y'all's class and your journey in that book. I'm going to leave that up to Paul. Okay. So what I want to do is bring another lesson, one that you might not typically hear on a Sunday morning, and what we have been doing at Fairview, I teach a class on Wednesday nights, and we've been studying from the Pentateuch. I know what I'm talking about there. I'm sure you do. I know that I've got some Bible scholars in here. We live in the Bible Belt, and I do appreciate all the wealth of knowledge that is had by the congregations here in southern Tennessee and northern Alabama. You know, we are truly blessed to have the Lord's church in the numbers that we do around here. I passed the Pleasant Valley, is that what it was, down at the bottom of the hill? They must meet at the unscriptural hour. There was nobody there. Okay, but anyway, we're blessed to have that. So what I want to do is just talk to us a little bit about the Pentateuch. Okay, it's a great study. Now, often when we study the Old Testament, okay, we do verse by verse studies, right? That's kind of the way that we do that, okay? And that's good. That's wonderful. We have to do that. We need to do that. We'll be richly blessed in knowledge and understanding when we do that, okay? But very often what I like to do is I like you just to back up a little bit and do what I call a 10,000-foot view of the Scriptures. Have you ever heard the expression, you can't see the forest for the trees? You know what I'm talking about? Sometimes when we're doing those verse-by-verse studies, which is absolutely necessary, but sometimes when we do that, we might not see the overall picture of what's taking place. And I think when we look back, when we step back and look at the Pentateuch, we learn a lot. The law, the law, the Old Testament law. And so I want us to do that, but I want us to start. I got a lot I want to bring out this morning. I know that we won't get there, but just a brief overview and pull out some of the highlights, some of the themes that are in those scriptures. So let's look at a historical view real quick like. Let's go to the book of Genesis. Now listen, if we're going to go from Genesis all the way to Deuteronomy, I'm not going to be able to read every verse, okay? I know that I've got Bible scholars in here, and you know the scriptures, and I expect you to hold us to the scriptures. Now, one thing I do, I was born and raised with the King James Version of the Bible, but I've been studying a little bit here lately with a different version. It's not a perversion. It's the English Standard Version, and I do apologize. I ran it by Paul first. I says, Paul, will it cause confusion if I use the ESV? Because I do know that when people are reading scriptures in another version and my version doesn't say that sometimes I scratch my head. I get lost a little bit, okay? It's a little bit confusing to me. But for the last couple of years, I've been giving this guy a try right here, this version a try, and I do like it. But there's a lot I do like about that old King James Version. I go back to it. I call that my foundational version, okay? But let's talk about this. The book of Genesis. How can we summarize in just a quick phrase or word the book of Genesis? And this is a Bible class. It is open for discussion. Now, I might be on a roll. You might need to get your hand raised or just speak out and say and make a point. And then put in the class. And it is a class. And so do let your thoughts be known. Okay? Questions be known. And if it's a question too hard, I'm going to revert it back to Paul saying and let him manage that, okay? Anyway, how could we get a real quick Reader's Digest explanation, description of the book of Genesis? Let me give you something real quick, like. And listen, none of this is original to me. Nothing. There's not a thought that comes in this head that's original. Everything I've known and studied, it comes from elsewhere. If it doesn't come from the scriptures, it might come from another book, okay? Here's how you can think about the book of Genesis, 4 and 4. Can you remember that? That's pretty easy. That's a little bit different, is it not? Okay. 4 events and then 4 individuals. Okay. And if you can kind of remember that, you'll have a small, brief summary outline of the book of Genesis. 4 events. What is the first event that we read about in the book of Genesis? Creation, you got it. Number 1, creation. Creation, okay? Next, what happens? What's the next major event? Flood. Just before the flood. What kind of contributed to the flood? What happened? The fall of man. So you have the creation, then you have the fall of man. And let me tell you, I'm going to have to rely on your existing scholarship. We won't have time to get to each of those. We'll get bogged down if I do that. So we got the creation, then we've got the fall of man. We understand what that is, the sin of Adam and Eve, okay? Then we have the flood. So we have the creation, the fall, and the flood. And then what happens after the flood? What major event begins to take place in the world? The nations are dispersed, right? Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the nations just explode upon the face of the earth. So if you could remember that, the creation, the fall, the flood, and then the nations, you've got half of that book down in your mind right here. Now you can say, well, what happened here? You can go back and get the particular points of that. Now, I mentioned there's 4 events. Now there are 4 people, okay? 4 people. Here they are. I know someone says Noah. Yes, he's important too. And they're all important. None are unimportant. But these, as we're studying the history, looking at the plan of salvation, God's plan to save and redeem man, okay? There's 4 instrumental people, okay? Number 1, Abraham. We all know Father Abraham, right? That's the way he's referred to. We know those stories by heart. Abraham's son, Isaac. We know about old Isaac, do we not? We read, and the promises that were made to Abraham were also made to Isaac. Do you know that? The same promises, that threefold promises. We won't have time to get that right now, though. So you got Abraham, you got Isaac, okay? And then who's the next major character on the scene? Jacob. Jacob is our next major character on the scene. And what was Jacob's name changed to? Somebody say it, come on. Israel. Israel, He had several sons, right? The 12 tribes of Israel. Actually, 2 of them are grandsons, right? Ephraim and Manasseh. So you got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Now, who is the major character in the book of Genesis that closes out that book? Joseph. Joseph. Now think about the story. We talked about those events. We see the fall and sin. You know, it was a perfect creation, was it not? It was without sin. And then Satan came onto the scene and tempted man, and man fell. We had the fall. And then man became so wicked through his sin that God decided to destroy the earth, but he did save mankind. And then we have the disbursement of those nations. And then we have Abraham coming onto the scene. God made a promise to him that he would do what? He says, if you'll be faithful to me, if you'll obey me, here's what I will do for you. What did he tell him? The threefold promises. You know this, Bible scholars. What are some of those? What are some of the, in Genesis chapter 12, what are the promises? What did he promise Abraham? He'd make a great nation of him. Remember the land promise? He was going to have the land. All that land he could see would be his one day, or his descendants. And then he would be the nation promise, that he would be the father of many nations, right? Not just the Israelite nation, but many nations. And that has kind of been a problem through the years, has it not? And then, that's actually caused some interesting events. It's God's will. Anyway, so you had the land promise, and you had the nation promise, and the final promise was what? That in thee all what? The nations of the earth will be blessed, which was what? The seed promise. And where was that fulfilled? In Christ, exactly. So you have that threefold promise there. So we can see the promises of God being laid out very early in God's plan or scheme to save mankind. Now, there you go. 4 and 4. 4 events and then 4 people. You got it. You have an outline of the book of Genesis. Now, let's go to the next book of the Pentateuch, or the book of law. Very interesting books. Very interesting books. Some people might kind of shy away from these books, especially as it goes on further into the book of Leviticus. We're going to talk about some interesting thoughts there in just a moment. And by the way, somebody's going to have to flag me down, because I will keep rolling, and about 4:30 we might get through. So I imagine at the end of this Bible class hour, what time do we need to kind of back off a little bit? A little bit of logistics here. What time do I need to break? 15 till. Okay, I've got 30 minutes. We better get going. We better get moving. We got a long way to go and a short time to get there. Genesis, you've got that under your belt. Now let's go to the book of Exodus. Remember that we closed out the book of Genesis with Joseph. And where were they at that time? Where was Israel at that time? The nation of Israel. Where were they? They were in Egypt. Oh, they were living the life, a bountiful life, correct? No, they were not. They were in slavery, were they not? It's a wonderful, exciting story about studying the life of Joseph and the providential hand of God. And I wish we had time to look at every thought there. I love to read the story when he finally united with his brothers. They are scared to death of him, are they not? They thought that once their father died, that he was going to take vengeance upon all of them. He said no. He said no, and I'm paraphrasing scripture. He says, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good to save many people. It was in God's plan and purpose that all that took place in the life of Joseph through the providential hand of God, that nation would be preserved. Okay, so now we're down in Egypt, right? That opens us up into the book of Exodus. In the book of Exodus, what's going on as we launch into that book? I would look. I did bring glasses. Those are most useful. Okay, as we open up the book of Exodus, what is taking place here? I want to make sure we got plenty of scripture in our lesson. What is good place? Look in Exodus chapter 3, beginning in verse 7. Chapter 3, verse 7. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of, watch this, my people who are in Egypt, and I've heard their cries because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out to land, to a good and broad land, a land that flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, Perizzites, the Hivites, and Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have seen the oppression which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come, I will send you, talking to whom? Moses. I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Okay? Now, how can I like these little short memory exercises. How can I remember or get an understanding of the book of Exodus? There's two major themes that take place in the book of Exodus. Number one, Israel had to be brought back out of slavery. We call that redemption. They had to be brought back out of that sinful nation, out of that sinful situation they're in. So they had to be bought back out. Okay, that's redemption. That's a major theme or a part of the book of Exodus. Now, what is the other part? So once he pulls them out of Egypt, okay, what kind of relationship did they have with God? Did Israel have with God? Once again, I'm going to have to rely on your existing, your scholarship you have, your knowledge of the books. Did they say, okay, God here, He's going to redeem us? Well, they were crying out to Him, but did they know God? Remember when He said earlier, and let me see if we can just go ahead and bring that out and take just a moment to do that. Basically, God tells Moses, He says, take your rod. What did He say? Take it before whom? Pharaoh, but also the people of Israel. When you read the text, he had to prove to Israel that God had visited him, God had given him this mission, because they didn't believe him. They doubted that God had visited him. I wish we had time to go and read that text for me, if you would, on your own. He had to prove himself, that is Moses, to Israel, not just to the Egyptians, not just to Pharaoh. He had to prove himself to Israel. He said, then one time, and when Moses said, God has sent me to do this, they said, well, what's his name? God hasn't visited you. God hasn't sent you on a mission here. They challenged him, do they not? And they continue to challenge his leadership and his authority. But anyway, so what did God have to do? Number one, He had to buy them back out of slavery, get them out of there. He had to redeem them from slavery. And then He had to reveal Himself to them. He had to prove who He was. He had to show that He was God, that He was Jehovah, that he was their God. He was the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, their forefathers, that he was their God. And those promises were made to them. Now, another thing, a thing that we do see very often, and we can probably look at a couple of verses on this too. Very often you will see the phrases, and let me encourage you to engage in a study of the Pentateuch. You'll see this terminology. He will say, I will be your God, and you will be my people. You'll see that phrase multiple times throughout the scriptures. Now, what type of word is will? What type of word? Is that past tense? I am your God, you are my people, or to say, I will be your God. Let's see if we can bear that out right quick. Let me see. I know I've got it highlighted here a number of times. Let's see. Just give me just a brief second here. Delay of time. Let's see. I know that I've got them highlighted here. Yeah, let's see. Let's go back to that. I've got them marked. My Bible is all marked up. You said 3:17. I'm over here. I'm well past all that. 3:17. I will come to the people of Israel, and they'll say to me, let me get down to it. That is in the Old Testament, correct? Okay. 3:17. And I promise that I will bring you out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, but very often we see the phrase, I will be your God. Hang on just a second. I do have it highlighted, and I do have it in my text over here. But one thing I do is I don't look at my notes too often. Let's see. And I did make note of that. Let's see. Where did we go with that? Okay, here it is. Let's go over here. Let's go to chapter 29. Sorry about that little delay there. That cost me time. When we get all the way over here, we're well into this. To the story, the narrative, and they're talking about the various offerings. Look in verse 42. And it shall be a regular burnt offering throughout your generations at the entrance of the temple, of the tent of meeting before the Lord, where I will, look at that, future tense, I will meet you to speak to you there. There I will meet with the people of Israel, and it shall be, future tense, sanctified by my glory. And I will sanctify the tent of meeting and the altar. Aaron and also his sons I will consecrate to serve me as priests. And I will, look at this, I will dwell among the people of Israel and will be their God. Oh, here we go. Where was God at this time? Pulling them out of Egypt, right? Pulling them out of Egypt. He had to redeem them, buy them back. Then he's got to make himself known to them. I will be your God, and you will be my people. I wish I'd have probably noted that a little bit more. Several times you'll see that terminology. I will be your God, and you will be my people. Now, let's talk about this. Why is God saying that? Why is he not saying, you are my people, I am your God? Where was God? Where's God in all this picture? Let's go back. Again, I'm going to pull on your existing knowledge of the scriptures. Let's go back when Israel is delivered from Egypt. Where's the first place they go? Where's the first place they go? They go to the Red Sea, but where is the first place they stop and encamp? And then a lot happens right there. Major important part. Mount Sinai. Somebody was fixing to say it, wasn't you? They were going to Mount Sinai. Oh, this is a very important location. A lot of things happen here. Do you know the first time God meets them? Look in chapter 19, verse 7. So Moses came and called the elders and the people and set before them the words the Lord had commanded them. And I'm going to have to paraphrase. They were to consecrate themselves. What does that mean? They were set aside in a very religious fashion themselves for a religious duty. He says, consecrate them today, down in verse 10. The people, today and tomorrow, let them wash their garments and be ready on the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in sight of all the people. You shall set limits for the people all around, saying, take care not to go up into the mountain or touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. Y'all remember that story? That Old Testament story? God tells Moses, go get the people ready, separate them, make them wash themselves, wash their clothes, consecrate them. And even though it also says consecrate the priest. Hey, you scholars, who were those priests? Had the Levitical priesthood been set up at that point? No. Who were those priests? When you go back and read that context, there's some priests there. There were priests before, under the patriarchal dispensation. There were priests. Yes, we do know about the Levitical priesthood. Under the law of Moses, that there were the Levites were set aside to be priests. But prior to that, under the patriarchal dispensation, there were priests. Look in that straight. There's you something to dig into, Bible scholars. There's you something to dig into. Anyway, let's move forward. Wash yourself. So here's what it is. God's having to reveal himself to man, to Israel. Here it is. He said, Moses, you tell the people, I want a barrier built at the bottom of the mountain. Okay? I want the people to be ready to meet me. And I want them to wash themselves and consecrate themselves. I want them to be ready to meet me. And they're not to come across, because I will break out on them and I will destroy them. Whoever crosses, even if an animal crosses the barrier, it will die. Why is that so? Why did that happen? Why did God set that barrier? Because Israel was an unholy people. What was God? He is a holy God. Unholiness, sin cannot dwell in the presence of an holy God. That's what the entire book of Leviticus is about. How to reconcile that. How to make man holy. We'll get there in a minute, hopefully. I better keep moving on. All right. So here we are at the base of Mount Sinai. All the people are gathered. Where does God show up? He's way up there on top of the mountain, is he not? And the people come out and they see the thunderings and the earthquake and shake. It's huge. It's tremendous. It's thunderings and lightnings. And let me tell you, let's go in verse 16 of Exodus 19. On the morning of the third day, there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. So all the people in the camp trembled. It scared them to death. They were meeting a holy God. And unholy people were meeting a holy God. There had to be a separation, though. There couldn't be. A holy God could not dwell amongst an unholy people. So now do you remember that? I will be your God. You will be my people. I will dwell among you. Where did he dwell when he finally made it across? We'll get there in a few minutes, though. Dwelled in that tabernacle. Interesting theme there. Let me tell you some of the most important things we must do in our study of the Pentateuch and the Scriptures. We have to understand the New Testament relevance here. Have you ever heard the phrase that the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, but the New Testament is the Old Testament what? Revealed. You cannot study the Pentateuch. You cannot study the book of Leviticus. Oh, that's a good book. I enjoy that book. You can't study that unless you study the book of Hebrews. That's where it applies to us. That's where it makes sense to us. But that's where our foundation grows and we learn. Whatsoever things written aforetime were written for our learning, Paul tells us. Anyway, where were we? He says, I will be with you. He's going to meet with them on the mountain. He's still up there. And they're down there. They're separated. God's up there. They're down here. But let's look at some other thoughts. Let's see how God moves close. He wants to be their God. He wants to be God. Why did God take Israel out of Egypt? Why did he take Israel out of Egypt? Here, that's just a little side note question here. Why did he take Israel out of Egypt? Any thoughts? And this is a class.
Maybe Brother Webb is part of the promises that all nations will be blessed. And Christ will come through that.
Right. That is true. In order to fulfill his promises, is what you're saying or alluding to. Okay? That's right. That was a wicked land, was it not? Later on, they said it talks about when you're studying Bible scholars, they had all these ornaments. At this point, God's ready to take care of them, especially after they sinned with the golden calf. He says, and they had all these Egyptian ornaments. Let me tell you, after that, God says, I'm fixing to destroy all of you. They got rid of those ornaments, and they never wore them again. They never wore them again. All right. I wish we had time to develop it. Why did he call them out? He says, I will dwell among them. I'm bringing them out of Egypt so that I can dwell amongst them. The verse eludes me at the moment, okay? I do have it written down. I just can't stop and focus long enough to see it, though, on my page here. Anyway, he wanted to dwell amongst his people. That's why he redeemed Israel. So the book of Exodus, we talked about the book of Genesis, 4 and 4. Remember that? The book of Exodus, he has to pull them out of Egypt. And then he has to reveal himself. Two major themes in the book of Exodus. Number one, redemption. We've covered that a little bit. We've touched on that. He had to redeem, bound back out of slavery. And number two, he had to reveal himself. Revelation. I will be your God. They didn't know who he was. They questioned him. He did not dwell amongst them. They were an unholy people. But he's going to get to know. He's going to reveal himself to them. That's what the book is about. Redemption and revelation. So now you've got Genesis and Exodus figured out, do we not? That timeline, that historical outline. All right. Any thoughts? Any questions? Comments? Let's look at another thought here now. I want you to watch how God moves among his people. Okay? Let's see. As he is building the tabernacle, he moves about them. Look with me if you in chapter 33. Go to 33. 33. Some of those same themes come in. 33. In verse 1 starting, he's telling Moses what to do. Go get them out of Egypt. According to the promise I swore to their fathers, I'll send an angel. I'm going to get rid of the people. They're going to a land that flows with milk and money. Now look down in verse 3. But I will not go up amongst you. That's what he's talking. This is God. This is Exodus 33 and in verse 3. Halfway down. But I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way. You are a stiff-necked people. That's that verse. One of the verses I'm looking for. I can't come amongst you. You're an unholy people. I can't go do that. And when the people heard this disastrous word, they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. They got rid of that Egyptian garb, seems like. Now, look down, if you would, in verse 5. For the Lord had said unto Moses, say to the people, you are a stiff-necked people, for if for a single moment I should go up among you. Look at there. If I should go up among you, I would consume you. Holiness consumes and destroys unholiness. Interesting, deep thoughts there. Verse 6, therefore the people of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward. That's Mount Sinai, part of it. Now look down here. Where's God at during all this? Look at this. Watch this. These next verse. Underline these. Highlight them. I've got them highlighted in my Bible. Now Moses used to take the tent. What tent is that? That's the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. And when you read back into the book of Exodus, all the requirements for building the tabernacle. Okay. Then they had to put the thing up. But where did they put it up at first? Look right here in verse 7. Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp. Why? What camp? That's Israel's camp. Remember that tent, that tabernacle, that tent of meeting? He said, don't put it up in the middle of people. I'll have to consume them when I come down to my tabernacle. Put it outside the camp. Now watch this. Far off from the camp, that is. And he called it the tent of meeting. And anyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. When Moses went out to the tent, the people would all rise and worship God. They would see him go in and on and on. They would recognize, they would worship. They could see the cloud. Moses goes in there. Where was God at this time? Was he tabernacling amongst them? No. He did not place his tent of meeting where he would meet God. That's where the mercy seat was. Back up just one thought. Back up chapter 25 and verse 17. You shall take a mercy seat pure of gold. Mercy seat several times in there. You shall put the mercy seat, verse 21. This is Exodus 25. Now look in verse 22. Look right there. He's talking to Moses. He says, there I will meet with you, and from above the mercy seat and from between the two cherubim that are on the ark of the testament, I will speak with you all about that I will give you in the commandment for the people. That's where God would speak to Moses, at the mercy seat. I know that y'all know how the tabernacle was structured, right? It had two components, two compartments. What were they? Very quickly. The holy place, and then what? The most holy place. And how often did they get to go in there after this all got started? Once a year. Who went in there? The high priest. With what? On what day? The Day of Atonement. That's one of the most exciting chapters in the book of Leviticus. The Day of Atonement. Let me tell you, I'm going to jump ahead of my lesson just a minute here because we're losing time. When you get to chapter 16 of the book of Leviticus, you have Israel. God reveals his plan of salvation to Israel. In other words, he tells them how to get saved. I kind of don't like that phraseology, but he tells them how to get saved, and the rest of the book tells them how to stay saved. When you go to the book of Leviticus, once again, two major parts. They learn about sacrifice. Oh, look at all those sacrifices, all types of sacrifices. There was order in sacrifices. You had to offer a burnt offering first to dedicate yourself for your sins and all that. And then later on, there were thanksgiving type, thank you, Lord, for blessing me types of sacrifices. But they had to learn about sacrifice first. That's the major theme of the book of Leviticus. Then they had to learn how to stay saved. That's all the book of Leviticus teaches us about Israel, ancient Israel. It told them how to be saved and how to stay saved. Ain't that simple? Oh, there's a lot more to it, though. Man, I've asked the question, who would want to study the book of Leviticus? Man, it talks about all kinds of gross stuff. It does. It talks about having skin diseases. It talks about human excretions. It talks about dead bodies. It talks about dietary laws and sanitary law. All like, ooh, who wants to study that book? Friends, if you study that book of Leviticus and you understand that book of Leviticus, and you read and study along with it the New Testament, especially in the book of Hebrews, where application is made, where we understand that the law was a shadow, chapter 10, Hebrews chapter 10, that the law having a shadow of good things to come. There's a comparison there. There's a parallel there. Types and antitypes. Oh, we need to study those. We need to mine those gems. It will broaden your understanding and knowledge of the Old Testament Scripture. It will make it such an exciting book that you won't be able to put it down, okay? Now, where was that? Where was God? Remember, he was up on the mountain. People were down below the line there, behind the line. And then now, as you see toward the end of the book of Exodus, he comes down finally. There's the tent. There's a camp right there. But God, he gets closer to them. He says, don't put it in there. I'll have to consume. Put it outside of the camp. And if they have a matter with me, they can come out and see me. Through the avenue of Moses. Is he still in their camp? No. No. Now look in Leviticus chapter 1. Chapter 1, verse 1. Where is God? Where is God? Where's man? Look with me if you would here in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 1. And the Lord called Moses, to speak to him from the tent of meeting. Moses was still outside the tent. God's in the tent of meeting, calling him in. And then the entire book of Leviticus, it teaches them how that they can be holy. It teaches them all about being separated from the nations about them through all of those sometimes arbitrary laws and regulations and rules that God placed on Israel to separate them from the nations about them. He called God. God called Moses from the tabernacle. That entire book tells them how to get saved and stay saved. Through sacrifices and sanctification. That is the maintaining of their holiness. How to become holy and how to maintain their holiness. Sanctification. The root word is saint. You know what the word saint means in our New Testament Bible? Saint, it means holy. Same word, same Greek word, holy. They learn how to be holy. Israel learns how to be holy so that God could come and dwell amongst them. Now, go to Numbers chapter 1. I'm probably going to have to quit with this one. We might get started. Well, anyway, go to Numbers chapter 1. Where is God? Where is God? He was up on the mountain. People would look up. Ooh, there he is. How wonderful and awesome he is. He's a distant God because of my unholiness. But thank God he gave them the criteria by which they could become holy. That's the book of Leviticus. Now, look in Numbers chapter 1 and verse 1. Now, watch the words real closely. Verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness. Look at here. Look at this next word. Where was he? In the tent of meeting. Now think about it. Oh, there's a big change there. Earlier, God, in the very onset of the book of Leviticus, prior to their holiness, prior to their sanctification, he has to call him in. And now it worked. The book of Leviticus, God's law, the laws of sacrifice and the laws of how to stay saved, sanctification, it worked. God is in the midst of them. A few more chapters over, you see that God gives instructions where to place his tabernacle. Where was it? Where did he put his tabernacle? When you think about how that eventually it worked out. When he said, I will dwell amongst them. Where did he put it? On the right, the left, the rear, the front, or did he put it dead center? He put it right dead center of the camp of Israel. The Levites circled him, okay? Those holy consecrated priests. And then all the tribes were dispersed in north, south, east, west of that. God was dwelling amongst his people. He was their God. They were his people. No more future tense. No more future tense. Listen, in the next hour, we're going to discuss another little topic here, one you might not say, that's interesting, that's a little different. The very last chapter of the book of Leviticus has to deal with vows and vow making. Now, you've not ever heard a sermon or a lesson concerning that. I don't know that I have, but vows. God regulated their vows so that they could maintain their sanctification and their holiness. I do appreciate your kind attention. Thank you.